It is now a personal honor to introduce Howard Fuller. Howard Fuller was there at the start, calling for innovative school opportunities and more parental voice in where their kids went to school. He was an inspiration to pioneers' work in the 1990s and still is to this day. It's truly an honor to introduce him. Dr. Fuller is a distinguished professor of education and director of the Institute for Transformation of Learning at Marquette University. Dr. Fuller has many years in both public service positions in the field of education, including superintendent of the Milwaukee Public Schools and the director of the Milwaukee County Department of Health and Human Services. As director of the Institute for Transformation of Learning, Dr. Fuller supports education options that transform learning for children while empowering families, particularly those of low income, to choose the best school options. He holds a BS degree from Carroll College, an MSA degree from Western Reserve University, and a PhD from Marquette University. Thank you very much for being here this morning, Dr. Fuller.
So good morning. First of all, I really want to thank Pioneer Institute for inviting me. And I owe Pioneer Institute a couple things. The first time I was ever invited to Boston to speak, I think Pioneer Institute did it. They were brave back then. I assume they still are. And one of the great things that happened was I met Linda Brown through that process. And she's one of my most favorite people out here and a great friend. I want to thank them again for inviting me this time because they're also making a contribution to the school whose board I chair. And we're in a desperate position to raise funds for our school, so I deeply appreciate that. I do have like one commercial, and that is for those of you who tweet. I'm in a contest with this friend of mine to see who can get the most followers on Twitter. So, I'm shameless. So, I just, so my Twitter handle is Howard L. Fuller. There, I did it. So I was tweeting about Ed's presentation, which I really appreciated. So, in preparing for my remarks this morning, I read Kara's paper, which I really appreciated receiving. I did read the Credo study that was just presented. And I'm about a third of the way through Paul Tough's book, How Our Children Succeed. And then I went back and read some papers that Ted Coldery had put together. For those of you who don't know, the reason why we're sitting in this room today is because of people like Ted Coldery in Minnesota, who came up with this idea, after Shanker and all of that. But, pushing for, got to give Shanker some credit on the charter school thing, and he deserves it, frankly. But it was, Ted Coldery and Joe Nathan and John Schroeder and all of those folks who decided that this was a good thing to do. So I went back and read some of Ted's stuff. And then I sort of overlaid all of the readings on my actual work as the chair of this board of a charter school. Because one of my contentions is that a lot of us who sort of run around the country talking about reform haven't seen a kid like in a long time. And so one of the things I think you probably ought to do is to see some kids or work with them. And having been the chair of this board has given me that, just really honor, really, to work with our children on a daily basis. So I'm like one of these unapologetic and relentless advocates for chartering as a process to enable us to establish better schools for our kids. And Ted Coldery explained the point I'm trying to make in this way. He said that people hear mostly about charter schools. The strategy of chartering is less visible and less understood. The purpose of the schools is to provide a more attractive, motivating, and successful learning experience for students. The purpose of chartering is to develop a new and more productive arrangement for public education, where we test an arrangement in which the schools are not supposedly under direct political control, in which key decisions about learning and about teachers are the responsibility of more autonomous boards, in which the enrollment is by choice, and which accountability for performance is real rather than rhetorical. So I took Ted's words as I was reading these different reports, and based on all the stuff I see around the country, having the benefit of traveling as I do on a regular basis all over this country. And so what I'm concerned about is our ability to sustain the principles of chartering that we started out with. Because frankly, I think the forces for protecting the status quo and defeating or severely limiting chartering are winning in many places. And if you ever want a better example, come to Massachusetts. Because there's no way, after reading the reports that I read, looking at the results of Credo, how would anyone not be running as fast as they could to remove any kind of hindrances to the growth of schools like this? What is the reason why, if you see these results, our elected officials wouldn't be running over themselves to say, caps, are you kidding me? We got to figure out a way to make sure that this work is expanded. The reason why they're not doing it, because the power of the forces that protect the status quo are stronger than ours. And that anybody who's in this room, and I don't care what your political persuasion, whatever it is, let's be really clear. The fight against chartering in this country has not lessened over these last 2 years. It has intensified. And the more successful the schools are, the more the intensity is going to occur. And the resistance comes whether you get good results or bad results. That's the beauty of traveling, because I've been in states where you don't have good results, and people say, we need to get rid of chartering because they don't have good results. You come to a place where there are good results, we need to cap chartering for this reason, this reason, this reason. And so we need to be clear that this has nothing to do with what is best for our children. This is a struggle over power and money. This is a struggle over who's going to control the flow and the distribution of the money. Who is going to control the way that this institution operates? Because one thing I'm clear about, having been a superintendent, my wife was a superintendent in Detroit. It is absolutely clear to me that school districts and schools are economic enterprises as much as they are educational enterprises. And so the fight is over the control of these economic enterprises that are also supposed to be educating our kids. And I'm not, and people get mad at me, Howard, why do you talk like this? Well, like, my thing is, I'm always mad. Just so you all know, I'm like perpetually like mad. And I'm mad because I don't understand how we could have the conditions that we have for our children in America. This is America. And so I'm mad in part because of that, but I'm mad mostly because we're not mad. And so when I go around, it's been clear to me, and I don't know if Jeannie agrees. I mean, Jeannie started in this whole battle much. She was like 12 when I met her. So although we've been in this a long time, she's much younger than me. But what's been clear to me, there's a playbook for what is happening here. And this is how the playbook operates. First thing is you try to prevent any of these laws from ever being passed. That's the first thing. The second thing is if it looks like they're going to pass, then weaken them. And you weaken them with caps. You weaken them by trying to curtail the amount of money. There's all of these different ways that you weaken it when it finally looks like, oh my God, this is going to pass. And then once it passes, you take it to court. And you try to like legally, oh, this is wrong, blah, 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 blah. Then if somehow you survive the court battle, what comes next is a whole slew of new regulations to make sure that now what we're going to do is strangle it. And during that entire process, you demagogue all of the people, all of the organizations that are somehow fighting for this change. And at the end of the day, you announce you're doing all of this because you love the children. So what I'm trying to make sure for those of you in this room who are actually warriors, and you want this chartering to continue not only to exist, but to expand, what I want to say to you is we must become more than just educators or policy wonks or researchers. We got to become fighters. We got to become effective organizers. Because the fact of the matter is we're being out-organized. And if at some point in time we do not address that, we're not going to have an expansion of successful efforts like what you see here in Massachusetts. But in addition to fighting the opposition, we have some internal issues that we have to deal with. And I think it's very difficult for anybody to talk about their internal issues when they're being attacked. But the reality is, if we don't talk about our internal issues, we're not going to strengthen ourselves for the attack. And so let me just talk about 3 or 4 things that I think we have to at least discuss. Number one, and I think Kara talked about this in her paper, we have to find ways to support quality without creating an environment where new voices and innovative ideas are crushed because they're not, quote, proven operators of quality. I think that is a major, major, major mistake. And what's really interesting about that is before these proven people were proven, they were just ideas in people's minds. And so the last thing that anybody who supports charters and chartering should want to do is to stifle new voices and new ideas and say we're only going to limit the chartering effort now to those proven people. That is how the status quo begins. So what we're going to end up, in essence, doing at some point is we're going to look just like that which we said we wanted to escape from. And so if we're not prepared, and let me say this, we have to be prepared to accept things that don't work as a way to try to get to new things that do work. That's what innovation is. Not all innovation is all successful. That's not, some of it is not going to work. But you have to create an environment that welcomes the possibility. Like we're trying to move our school to a blended learning environment. And I would argue that 4 or 5 years ago, there were people whose minds were closed to the idea of blended learning. And now they're a little bit more open, but the attacks are still coming. You have not proven that this works. And I've heard people tell me that who's sitting over in Montessori schools. And so because I don't understand things, I didn't know that Montessori schools always existed. I actually thought there was a point where they started. You know that, and there was no research that proved that this was going to be the greatest thing that ever happened to education. At some point in time, there is no research to prove that what you're going to do is successful because it just started. And so that's the first thing. The second thing is, and I just have to say this as bluntly as I can, we have to find ways to ensure that people of color are an integral part of this movement at all levels. There must be an intentional and conscious effort to make that happen. We cannot have a situation where all of the great schools, all of the high flyers, that all of them are white, and that all of these white people are getting all of the money. And all of the white people are running around calling each other awesome. And all y'all can't be awesome, with all due respect. Some of it, I mean, but that's how I go. You awesome, I'm awesome, and all of us little awesome people who went to Yale and Harvard, we're all awesome, and the rest of y'all, well, you're not awesome. So at some point in time, we have to be clear. There's a connection between liberation and education and liberation. And at a certain point in time, people have to be a critical part of their own liberation. And even if you didn't believe that, politically, it's forget the moral aspects of this. Politically, you cannot continue to have all white people coming to black and Latino legislators and people saying, you got to support us because we're great, and there's none of y'all that's in this running it. Even if you didn't believe this for moral reasons and the right reasons, there's a political reason that we're going to have to address what I think is a very difficult problem in our movement. The third thing is, we cannot have this movement only open to the charter management organizations and the education management organizations, the CMOs and the EMOs. It's kind of a connect back to the proven thing. There has to be room in this movement for so-called one-off schools, single-site schools, people who don't want to run 25 schools. They just want to create one great school for their community. They just want to create one school that changes the nature of their community. And if we continue along the path that we're on, where all of the funding coalesces around the selected CMOs or EMOs, we're going to lose. And frankly, we should lose, because then we're no longer the reason why I got into this. I did not get into this so that great people could replicate. I'm happy about all that. I got into it because I thought we wanted to create institutions in communities that believed in those communities, and they were going to fight for the kids in those communities, and you don't have to create 10 of them to prove your worth. But if what we do is continue to say we're only going to fund those that are replicable and only if you're going to operate in 22 states, and we're going to lose the soul of this movement. The fourth, equitable funding. We have to fight to make sure that there's equitable funding such that you can survive without having to have major philanthropic investment. Because that major philanthropic investment, and let's be clear, for a lot of the major CMOs or high flyers out here, they're making it because of significant philanthropic investment. I'm not saying that that's true in all cases, but it is true in many cases. And if that's going to be the basis upon which the great ones survive, the long-term prospects for this movement, in my opinion, are not good. Finally, and this is a hard one for me, but I just have to say it. And I understand. I want you all to know that with me, when I speak, I'm always like trying to think about like what I was wrong about. Because if you've been in this as long as I am, you have to be clear. Some of the stuff you thought was going to happen or you thought was really great 20 years ago, right now it ain't so great. And a part of what I'm about is admitting that, hey, I had this idea 10 years ago. I thought it was going to be really cool, but you know what? It ain't so cool. Because a part of, to me, how you fight for change is you be honest. And you admit, like, hey, this is what we thought, but this is the lessons we've learned. We got change. That's what change is. Because, you know, the interesting thing about change that I've learned is that in America, most people want change as long as nothing changes. And so for those of us who are change agents, we also have to be willing to change. And so, but one of the things that I think is a mistake is to put all of our eggs in terms of determining success of chartering and charter schools in the testing basket. But let me make sure I'm clear. You cannot have a way to assess schools without testing. I am not in the group that we need to eliminate testing. That to me is absurd. But I am in the group that says, and reading Paul Tuff's book and some other people like really helped me like continue to struggle with this. I do think we got to figure out how to assess the value of non-cognitive skills. Because I think when you look at the data and you look at what people are saying, and I look at my own kids at our school, it is hard to argue that persistence and self-control and curiosity and grit and self-confidence, all of those, it's hard to argue those things are not important. Our problem is to figure out how do we help kids get those who don't have them, and then how do you measure it? Because how do you measure its impact? Because whatever it is we're talking about doing, to me, you have to figure out how to measure it. And there are ways to measure it. I mean, if you look at Paul's book and he looks at the Perry studies and goes back and talks about looking at people over a period of 43 years, and the criticism that came initially was that after third grade, those test differences didn't hold. But if you look at those people 43 years later and you look at their life attainment and you look at what, they not going to prison, all of these good things, there's something about that. Or the whole look at GED, where they've looked at GED and said, really a lot of people get GED are as smart as the people who stay in and finish high school, but only about a third of them go on to college and whatever. And the issue that they're seeing is that a part of being successful is staying in high school with these boring teachers, all of these rules, all of this stuff, that is all of that stuff that also has an impact along with your academic attainment to make it possible for you to be successful. So what I want you all, so those are just 5 areas that I think internally as a movement we need to think about. There are others. I mean, I know Jeannie's going to talk about authorizing. I'm not going to talk about that. So, but what I want you also to understand is, and this is just the way that I am a strong supporter of chartering and charter schools, but I am also a deep believer in staying true to purpose, not to the method to get us to purpose. In other words, to me, chartering is no sacred thing. It's good as long as it works for kids. Because ultimately, I'm not in this for chartering or charter schools. I'm in this to try to make sure that the poorest children in this country get an effective education. Because I believe that is the only lever that they have that gives them a chance in this country. And that ultimately, those of us who become committed to a method instead of to a purpose, we will easily become people who then support the new status quo. And so ultimately, to me, the issue is stay committed to the reason for being. And the reason for being was to launch a movement that would allow us to create better schools for our kids. And the point I'm trying to make here is, for me, this movement has always been about social justice. And to me, parent choice, of which charter schools are under that parent choice umbrella, is just one element of trying to provide low-income and working-class people in this country some of the things that those of us with money have. And that's always been, for me, the guiding force. So at the end of the day, what should drive all the decisions that we make are the needs and interests of our children, not the needs and interests of the adults. Now, as the years go by, to me, it's very difficult to maintain a sense of purpose and not get caught up in protecting the institutional arrangements. And I understand, because if charters are good, you got to protect them, right? But on the other hand, if we are not true, let me put it this way. Relatively speaking, fighting a revolution is easier than governing. Because once you govern, you actually then have to do stuff. I mean, you have to do stuff to fight a revolution, but then you get in charge. And the question then is, you're in charge. Are you making it better for the people? We have charter schools. Is it now better for the kids? And so along this road to achieving excellence, that to me has to be paramount. So let me move to a close by talking about this for a moment. Because I've talked a lot, obviously, about chartering charter schools. But I want to make sure that you all are absolutely clear that it makes a difference in this country if you have power and access to resources. That makes a difference in this country. And that although I'm talking about charter schools, let's be clear that issues like race and class matter in America. Children who are hungry cannot learn. Children who are abused and neglected, let me rephrase that. Children who are hungry are going to find it very difficult to learn. And I'm going to come back and revisit this so you all are clear on what I'm saying. Children who are abused and neglected are not going to be able to concentrate in school. Children who never see anybody in their family go to work are not going to understand the connection between education and work. Children must see a society where their race will not be an impediment to advancement and respect. Children must interact with adults who have not already reached conclusions about the capabilities that they have because of the color of their skin or the clothes that they wear or the fact that they got red streaks in their hair or whatever it is. I mean, I'm amazed all the conclusions people reach because you see a young man with his pants, below his behind. And actually, when I see a lot of these young brothers, I actually see people who understand physics, because there's no other explanation for how they are able to not only walk but run. And so, even though when they come in our school, we tell them to pull their pants off. It's just an adult. I mean, let's be clear. What is the fun of being young if you don't do something that just drives your parents and all other adults insane? I mean, that's the idea of being young. Who wants to be young and do stuff that old people like? The idea is to shock you. Oh my God. You what? Well, your hair, why you got all those, you got stuff in your nose, your lips, your tongue. What are you doing? That's the beauty of being young. You know what I'm saying? But we got to be clear that because you see that, that's no determination as to what their capacity is. Because a lot of you all who are now all upstanding citizens and stuff, I dare to say that most of y'all wasn't like that several years ago. Maybe some of you all were, but a lot of you all were probably like, oh my God, you're never going to make it, all of that. Our kids are the same way. I mean, race and class, I was talking to a young woman last night, and I asked her to explain to me what post-racial America is. Because I know there's an explanation out there. I don't know what it is, because in my world, race and class still matters in America. You know, like, for example, you all know that the only people who will ever say that money doesn't matter are people who got money. Nobody without money in America is rolling around talking about how cool it is to be out here broke. So that the reality of it is that money matters to our children. It has an impact on their life chances. And what I'm trying to get at here is that I understand the no excuses schools, but no excuses, that should not be a stand-in for not understanding impact. I'll give you an example. Yesterday, last Thursday, one of our students, two of our students, Nashay and Shaquita's mother died. And their mother died like about a half hour after they had come to school. They had just left her. And so it was up to us to tell them that their mother just died. And so yesterday before I came here, I stopped by school, and I was talking to Shay. And she was saying, Dr. Fuller, I'm just angry. And so for about 15 minutes, I just sat there and listened to her explain to me the anger that she had about her mother dying and the way that the hospital had treated her mother. And I'm saying that to say that it is not to make excuses to say, this is not going to be a great day for this Shay to learn. Just go to class, dear. No excuses. That's absurd. Or to say it doesn't matter that you had to sleep in a car last night. It does matter. Poverty matters. It's just that we can't use that as an excuse not to try to figure out a way to reach these kids. And I'm gonna just mention Diane, just not to be, Diane Ravitch, because I was tweeting one day, and usually Diane don't respond to me, which is cool, because I don't respond to her, and it's a good thing. We can continue to be friends like that. So I was in the D.C. airport tweeting, and John White, the superintendent of Louisiana, tweeted something about poverty should not be destiny. I thought it was a pretty cool tweet. And so I retweeted, and all of a sudden Diane's picture appeared on my Twitter handle. So for about 45 minutes, we were tweeting back and forth with each other, because she was saying, Howard, you know that poverty matters. And I was tweeting back like, Diane, when did y'all have the press conference to figure that out? What day did y'all figure that out? Of course it matters. Of course it matters. It's like Richard Rothstein wrote this book, Class in Schools, and we were having a debate. And he said, well, we're never going to deal with education and equity until we eliminate poverty. And I was like, well, why don't we just adjourn? Let's have a good meal and let's go home. Because poverty is not going to be eliminated tomorrow. But by the way, isn't there a connection between getting people in education and having some impact on their lives in terms of being in poverty? Is there some relationship between these things? So I guess what I'm saying to all of you is that this fight, there's no more important fight in America than for our children's education. There is no more important fight. This is the fight for this country. Because Kenneth Clark years ago talked about you cannot have a democracy without an educated populace. We must educate the people. And I told a group of people the other night at a thing we were doing in Milwaukee, I said, y'all got the symphony and the PAC and y'all got all this stuff downtown and y'all love it. You don't want to have armed guards for y'all to come to this. So at a certain point, you're not going to be able to build enough gated communities in America to keep them away from us. This is the issue for our time. This is the issue that's going to determine, at least in my opinion, the sustenance of our democracy. Can we educate our children? And charter schools, at least in this period of history, have to be a critical part of that effort. And so I just want to wish all of you all who are in this fight to lift the cap, which is really stupid. Let me just announce that. That's a very academic term. This is stupid to have caps on an effort that is being this successful with our children. So I wish you the best, and I thank you very much for inviting me.